stood in the long line of hopeful recruits, watching the massive alien structure around him with quiet eyes. The Galactic Imperial Fleet Recruitment Station was bigger than any building he had ever seen on Earth. Creatures from dozens of different worlds waited alongside him, some tall and thin like walking trees, others short and covered in thick fur, a few that looked like they were made of living crystal. The human next to him, a nervous young woman named Sarah, kept fidgeting with her application papers. "I heard they only accept 1 in every 100 applicants," she whispered too. "What if we're not good enough?" Just smiled. "Don't worry about it, what happens, happens." Sarah stared at him. "Aren't you nervous at all? This is the Imperial fleet we're talking about. They fight wars across the entire galaxy." "I've seen worse," said quietly, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, I'm sure it'll be fine." The line moved forward slowly. Watched the other species around him. There were the ones running the recruitment station, tall blue beings with 4 arms and golden eyes that never seemed to blink. They moved with careful precision, checking each applicant's papers before sending them to different testing areas. When reached the front desk, an officer looked up from her computer screen. Her name tag read Administrative Supervisor. She scanned the paperwork handed her. "Human from the Sol system," she said in perfect English, though her voice had a musical quality that made it clear this wasn't her first language. "Age 25, previous military experience with Earth Defense Forces. Clean health record." She looked up at him. "Why do you want to join the Imperial Fleet?" Met her golden gaze without flinching. "I want to serve something bigger than myself. Earth is just one small world. Out here, I can make a real difference." I made some notes on her screen. "You understand that Imperial service means you might never return to Earth, that you'll be fighting alongside species you've never seen before, in places your people have never been." "I understand." "And you're not afraid of death." Paused for just a moment and something strange passed across his face. "No, I'm not afraid of death." I studied him carefully. Something in his tone caught her attention, but she couldn't figure out what. After a moment, she stamped his papers. "Report to Testing Bay 7. Good luck, human." Testing Bay 7 was filled with obstacle courses, weapon ranges, and simulation pods. Watched as other applicants tried their best at various challenges. The 6-legged creatures that looked like giant insects dominated the speed courses. The rock-like crushed the strength tests. The floating, jellyfish-like nethers excelled at the mental puzzles. When it was turn, he performed well but not perfectly. He scored in the top 20% on most tests, but wasn't the best at anything specific. During the combat simulations, he made smart choices and showed good instincts, but lost several matches against more experienced fighters from warrior species. What caught the attention of the testing supervisors wasn't his skill level, it was his attitude. When lost a fight, he would get up, dust himself off, and ask his opponent to show him what he did wrong. When he got injured during the physical tests, he barely seemed to notice the pain. When a simulation killed him, he would step out of the pod and immediately ask to see the replay. "Interesting human," muttered testing supervisor, or a massive bear-like creature from the Confederacy. "Most new recruits get upset when they fail. This one acts like he expected it." "Maybe he's just confident," suggested his assistant, a small blue creature with large eyes. "No, it's more than that. Watch how he moves when he thinks he's going to get hit. He doesn't try to avoid it, he positions himself to take the hit in the best possible way, like he's done this before." The tests continued for 3 days, consistently performed at a solid, dependable level. More importantly, he showed the kind of mental toughness that Imperial commanders valued. He never got angry when things went wrong. He never complained about difficult conditions. He seemed genuinely curious about every challenge, even the ones that hurt. On the final day, Admiral himself came to review the top candidates. Was an impressive figure even among the nearly 8 feet tall, with ceremonial scars across his blue skin and 4 golden medals hanging from his chest. He had commanded fleets in 7 different wars and was considered one of the finest military minds in the Empire. He stopped in front of, who stood at attention with perfect posture. "Of Earth," said, reading from a data pad. "Your test scores are good but not exceptional. Your combat performance is solid but not outstanding. Tell me why I should accept you into the elite Vanguard Corps." Looked directly at the Admiral. "Because I'm exactly what you need, sir. I don't break under pressure. I learn from every mistake, and I'm not afraid of the jobs that others won't take." "Every recruit says they're not afraid," said with amusement. "What makes you different?" "With respect, sir, most recruits say they're not afraid because they don't really understand what they're afraid of yet. I do." Admiral studied the young human for a long moment. There was something unsettling about, though he couldn't put his finger on what it was. The human seemed too calm, too accepting of dangerous possibilities. But those were exactly the qualities the Empire needed in its elite units. "Very well," said finally. "Welcome to the Imperial Fleet, Trooper." The acceptance ceremony took place that evening in the main assembly hall. Hundreds of new recruits from dozens of species stood in neat rows, wearing their new Imperial uniforms. Stood among them, looking proud but not surprised, as if this outcome had never been in doubt. Admiral gave a speech about honor, duty, and the bonds between different species fighting for a common cause. Cameras recorded everything to broadcast across the Imperial networks, showing the galaxy that the Empire welcomed all worthy beings, no matter how young their civilization might be. As the ceremony ended and the new recruits filed out to begin their training, Admiral found himself watching. The human moved through the crowd with confident steps, already seeming to know where he was going. There was something about him that didn't quite fit, but couldn't figure out what. "An interesting one, that human," said Commander, the fleet's chief medical officer who had appeared beside him. "Indeed," replied. "Something tells me is going to be either our greatest asset or our biggest problem." "Which do you think?" Admiral watched as disappeared into the crowd of new recruits. "I honestly don't know." 6 months after joining the Imperial Fleet, had earned a reputation that confused his fellow soldiers. He wasn't the strongest fighter or the tactician, but there was something about him that made even veteran warriors step back and take notice. His first real combat mission came on the frontier world of Seven, where rebel forces had taken control of a mining facility. Was assigned to Tactical Unit Theta, commanded by a grizzled sergeant named K, who had been fighting wars since before humans had discovered space travel. "Listen up, rookies," K growled to his mixed squad of new recruits. "This isn't training anymore. The rebels have real weapons and they know how to use them. Stay close, follow orders, and try not to get your squad mates killed." The mission seemed straightforward: infiltrate the mining complex, disable the rebels' communication array, and hold the position until reinforcements arrived. Studied the tactical briefing with the same calm attention he showed everything else. "Question, Sergeant," said as they prepared their equipment. "What's the backup plan if they have snipers positioned on the eastern ridge?" Kay looked up from checking his weapon. "What makes you think they'll have snipers there?" "Just seems like the logical place to put them. Good sight lines, multiple escape routes, elevated position." Shrugged. "If I were defending this place, that's where I'd put them." "Well, you're not defending it, rookie. You're attacking it. Stick to the plan." But when they reached the mining complex, the first thing that happened was sniper fire from the eastern ridge. 3 shots rang out, forcing the entire squad to dive for cover behind a pile of mining equipment. "How did you know?" demanded Corporal I, a crystalline being whose species was known for their tactical intelligence. "Lucky guess," said, but he was already moving. while the rest of the squad focused on returning fire at the ridge, spotted something else. "Sergeant, they're flanking us from the south. 2 squads, maybe 3. They'll be in position in about 90 seconds. Kay looked where was pointing but saw nothing. "I don't see any movement down there." "Trust me," said quietly, "they're coming." Against his better judgment, Kay repositioned half the squad to cover the southern approach. 87 seconds later, exactly as had predicted, rebel forces attacked from that direction. The Imperial squad was ready for them. "Lucky guess again?" I asked after they had driven off the attack. Didn't answer. He was studying the mining complex with intense concentration, like he was reading something invisible written on the walls. "We need to move fast," he said finally. "They're planning to blow the main supports and bring the whole structure down on us." "That would destroy their own facility," Kay protested. "They're not planning to keep it," replied. "This whole thing is a trap. They want us inside when it comes down." This time, Kay didn't hesitate. He trusted strange instincts and called for immediate extraction. The squad had barely cleared the danger zone when the entire mining complex collapsed in a series of explosions. Word of his performance spread quickly through the military ranks. Other soldiers started requesting him for dangerous missions, not because he was the best fighter, but because he seemed to know things that kept people alive. During a space battle near the nebula, volunteered to pilot a fighter in a desperate assault against a rebel cruiser. His squadron leader, a veteran pilot named Commander, watched in amazement as flew his ship through enemy fire like he knew exactly where every shot would be. "How are you threading those attack patterns?" I asked over the comm system. "That's impossible flying." "Just following the math," replied, but his voice was calm even as explosions lit up space around him. "The enemy gunners have a rhythm. Once you know it, you can predict where they'll shoot." Not only survived the assault, but managed to disable the rebel cruiser's main weapons with a precise strike that should have been impossible at such close range. When they returned to base, Commander pulled him aside. "I've been flying combat missions for 15 years, she said. "I've never seen anyone predict enemy fire like that. Where did you learn to fly like that?" "Lots of practice," said simply. "Practice where? Earth doesn't have any space combat training facilities." Paused, and for just a moment, something dark flickered across his face. "I've had more practice than you might think." As the months passed, his reputation grew. He was promoted to corporal, then sergeant, then lieutenant with unusual speed. But it wasn't just his tactical skills that impressed people, it was his attitude toward danger. During a ground assault on the rebel stronghold of Vex Prime, led a squad through a minefield that had stopped Imperial forces for weeks. He moved through the buried explosives with perfect confidence, never hesitating, never second-guessing his path. "How do you know where the mines are?" asked Private, a young who was new to combat. "You can tell by the way the ground settles," explained patiently. "Also, the rebels have a pattern to how they place them. They're predictable once you understand their thinking." "But you've never fought these particular rebels before. How do you know their patterns?" Was quiet for a moment. "I've fought rebels before. They're all basically the same." But that wasn't quite true, and some of the more experienced soldiers were starting to notice. Didn't just predict enemy tactics. He seemed to know specific details about weapons, vehicles, and technologies from dozens of different worlds. He spoke casually about combat techniques from species he had supposedly never encountered. He knew the weak points of alien armor designs that were classified military secrets. Most disturbing was his reaction to injury and death. During the siege of Station, took a plasma bolt to the shoulder that should have put him out of action for weeks. He barely seemed to notice it, wrapping a bandage around the wound and continuing to fight like nothing had happened. "That's a serious injury," Dr. Ra told him when they returned to base. "You should be in agony." "I've had worse," said matter-of-factly. "When? Your medical records show no serious injuries." Looked at her for a long moment, and something in his eyes made her take a step back. "I heal fast." But it wasn't just physical injuries. Watched fellow soldiers die in combat with the same calm expression he wore when studying tactical maps. He mourned them appropriately and honored their memory, but he never seemed shocked or traumatized by death the way normal people did. "It's like he's seen it all before," Sergeant K confided to Commander A after a particularly brutal battle. "Every type of wound, every way to die, every possible disaster. Nothing surprises him." "Maybe he's just naturally tough," A suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. "No, it's more than that. Watch him sometime when he thinks nobody's looking. He studies our weapons and vehicles like he's comparing them to something else, and he talks to himself in languages that aren't in any Imperial database." Commander A frowned. "What kind of languages?" "I don't know, but yesterday I heard him counting in something that sounded like mathematical formulas. When I asked him about it, he claimed he was just practicing his numbers. But I speak, and that wasn't what he was saying." As reputation continued to grow throughout the Imperial fleet, so did the questions about who he really was and where his impossible knowledge came from. But those questions would have to wait. The Empire had bigger problems to worry about, and was proving to be exactly the kind of soldier they needed to solve them. At least that's what they thought. The battle for the system was supposed to be a routine operation. Imperial intelligence reported that rebel forces had established a supply base on the fourth planet, defended by maybe 2 cruisers and a handful of fighters. Lieutenant was assigned to lead a small strike team aboard the destroyer Relentless under the command of Captain L. What they found instead was a full rebel fleet, 12 heavy cruisers, 36 fighters, and a massive dreadnought that shouldn't have existed according to Imperial records. "All ships evasive maneuvers," Captain L shouted over the communication system as enemy fire erupted around them. "We're vastly outnumbered. Prepare to retreat." But was studying the enemy formation with the same intense concentration he showed everything else. Something was bothering him about the way the rebel ships were positioned. "Captain, wait," said from his position at the tactical station. "Look at their attack pattern. The dreadnought is staying back too far from the main engagement." "Of course it is," Captain L snapped. "It's a command ship. They're keeping it safe while the cruisers do the fighting." "No, that's not it." Traced patterns on his screen with one finger. "Look at the energy readings. That dreadnought isn't commanding anything, it's charging weapons. Something big. They're planning to fire it through their own fleet." Captain L looked at the tactical display. "That's impossible. They destroy their own ships." "Only if their own ships are still there when it fires." His voice was getting urgent. "Captain, they're going to sacrifice the cruisers to take out our main formation. The dreadnought has some kind of super weapon that fires through hyperspace. It'll hit our fleet even if we retreat." "How could you possibly know that?" Paused, realizing he had said too much. It's the only tactical choice that makes sense." Captain L stared at the human officer. Had been right about enemy tactics dozens of times before, but this was different. He wasn't just predicting what the enemy might do. He was describing specific technology that Imperial intelligence had never seen before. "Lieutenant, I need you to be very specific. What exactly do you think that weapon does?" Looked uncomfortable for the first time since anyone had known him. "It's probably some kind of focused quantum tunneling device. Fires energy bursts through folded space. Range of maybe 8 light minutes, charges for about 6 minutes between shots." "And you know this how?" "I don't know it," said quickly. "I'm just guessing based on the energy patterns I'm seeing." But his description was too detailed, too precise to be a guess. Captain L made a decision that probably saved the entire Imperial fleet. Instead of retreating in formation, he ordered all ships to scatter in random directions. 7 minutes later, Exactly as had predicted, a beam of pure energy tore through space where the Imperial fleet had been moments before. The weapon was so powerful it destroyed 3 rebel cruisers that hadn't moved out of the way in time. "By the void," breathed Captain L. "You were exactly right. How did you know?" Didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the tactical display with an expression that looked almost like sadness. "Lucky guess," he said finally. But Captain L wasn't satisfied with that answer, and neither was Doctor when she read the battle report later that day. Doctor was the Imperial Fleet's chief, responsible for monitoring the mental health of soldiers from dozens of different species. She had been quietly collecting reports about for months, and the pattern she was seeing disturbed her. New things he shouldn't know. He understood alien technology that humans had never encountered. He showed emotional reactions that didn't match his supposed experience level. Most troubling, he seemed to have detailed knowledge of specific military tactics and weapons that were classified above his security level. After the battle, Doctor requested a private meeting with. She found him in the ship's observation deck, staring out at the stars with the same calm expression he wore everywhere else. "Lieutenant," she said, settling into a chair across from him, "I'd like to ask you some questions about your recent performance evaluations." "Of course, Doctor. Is there a problem?" "Not a problem exactly. More like a puzzle." Doctor activated a small recording device. "You've been right about enemy tactics in 17 separate engagements. That's a remarkable record, especially for someone with relatively little combat experience." "I've been lucky." "Have you? Let's talk about the Battle of 7. You predicted sniper positions that weren't visible to anyone else. How did you know they were there?" Shrugged. "It seemed like the logical place to put them." "And at Vex Prime, you knew the exact pattern of rebel mine placement. How did you know that?" "Educated guess." "And today, you described a superweapon that Imperial intelligence has no records of. Not just that it existed, but exactly how it worked and how long it took to charge. That's quite an educated guess." Was quiet for a long moment, and Doctor could see him choosing his words carefully. "Doctor, what exactly are you asking me?" "I'm asking how a human from Earth, with 6 months of Imperial fleet training, knows more about alien military technology than officers who have been fighting these wars for decades." "Maybe I'm just good at pattern recognition." "Maybe you are, or maybe there's something you're not telling us about your background." Doctor leaned forward. "I've reviewed your personal files, your medical records, your psychological evaluations, your family history on Earth. Everything appears normal, but there are gaps. Small ones, but they're there." His calm expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "What kind of gaps?" "Your childhood medical records are incomplete. Your educational transcripts show courses that don't exist at the schools you attended. And most interesting, your psychological profile shows no trauma reactions to combat stress, even though you've witnessed more violence in the past 6 months than most soldiers see in their entire careers. Some people handle stress better than others." "Yes, they do, but you don't just handle stress, you seem completely comfortable with it, like you've seen it all before." Doctor watched his face carefully. "Have you seen it all before?" For just a moment, his mask slipped. Something dark and tired passed across his face, and he looked older than his 25 years. Then the expression was gone. "I don't know what you want me to say, Doctor. I want you to tell me the truth, about who you really are, where you really came from, and how you know the things you know." Stood up and walked to the observation window. For a long time he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was so quiet Doctor had to strain to hear him. "Have you ever wondered what it would be like if you could never be surprised by anything? If every possible disaster, every type of pain, every way to die was something you had already experienced?" "That's an interesting philosophical question," Doctor said carefully, "but it doesn't answer my question." Turned back to her, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked genuinely tired. Maybe it does. Before Doctor could respond, the ship's alarm system began to sound. "All hands to battle stations," came the announcement over the comm system. "Enemy ships detected on approach vector." Straightened up, and the tired expression vanished from his face. "Duty calls, Doctor. We'll have to continue this conversation later." But as headed for the door, Doctor called after him. "Lieutenant, whatever you're hiding, I will find out eventually." Paused in the doorway and looked back at her. "Doctor, I don't think you want to find out. Trust me on that." After he left, Doctor sat alone in the observation deck, staring at her recording device and thinking about the implications of what she had just heard. Was hiding something, that much was certain. The question was whether that something was dangerous to the Empire or to himself. She decided to dig deeper into his files, much deeper. What she would find there would change everything. Doctor spent 3 days digging through every piece of data the Imperial fleet had on Lieutenant. What she found made her question everything she thought she knew about human beings. It started with his neural implant. Every Imperial soldier carried a basic cybernetic interface that helped them communicate with alien technology and provided tactical data during combat. Implant appeared normal on the surface, but when Doctor ran a deep diagnostic scan, she discovered something that shouldn't exist. Hidden beneath layers of standard Imperial software was a massive data archive. The files were encrypted with technology that was decades ahead of anything in the Imperial database. It took Doctor 2 more days to crack even the basic access codes. What she found inside made her hands shake. The archive contained detailed records of over 70,000 separate death experiences. Not simulation, not training scenarios, actual deaths. The records were meticulously organized. Death by plasma fire, death by explosive decompression, death by alien toxins, death by energy weapons, death by bladed weapons, death by crushing, death by burning, death by freezing, death by drowning, death by suffocation. Thousands upon thousands of different ways to die, each one recorded with precise medical data and tactical observations. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part was the timestamps. Many of the deaths were dated in the future, had detailed records of dying in battles that hadn't happened yet, on planets he had never visited, fighting enemy species that the Imperial fleet had never encountered. Doctor's hands were shaking so badly she could barely operate her computer. She ran the data through every verification system she could access. The results were always the same. The files were genuine, unmodified, and absolutely impossible. She spent another day analyzing the medical data embedded in each death record. The level of detail was incredible. His body had been burned by 17 different types of energy weapons. He had been poisoned by toxins from 43 different alien species. He had been shot, stabbed, crushed, frozen, electrocuted, and dismembered in ways that would have killed him permanently dozens of times over. And yet he was walking around the ship right now, alive and healthy, giving tactical advice to the bridge crew. Doctor realized she needed help. This was beyond anything she could handle alone. She sent an encrypted message to Admiral, requesting an immediate private meeting with the highest level of Imperial command. 24 hours later, Doctor found herself in the most secure briefing room aboard the flagship Dominion, facing Admiral and 3 other senior commanders she had never seen before. "Doctor," Admiral said without preamble, "your message mentioned a security concern regarding Lieutenant. What have you discovered?" Doctor activated her portable display and projected the data she had found. "Admirals, what I'm about to show you will challenge everything we think we know about human capabilities." She walked them through her findings step by step. The impossible knowledge, the unexplained tactical abilities, the complete lack of normal stress responses to combat, and finally, the death archive hidden in his neural implant. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "You're telling us," said Admiral, a massive commander, "that this human has detailed records of 70,000 deaths, his own deaths." "That's correct, sir. And many of these deaths haven't happened yet." "According to the timestamps, yes, sir." Admiral studied the data with the careful attention of someone who had seen many impossible things during his long career. "Doctor, what's your professional assessment of Lieutenant's mental state?" "That's just it, Admiral. He shows no signs of trauma, psychosis, or any other mental illness. His psychological profile is completely normal except for his lack of fear regarding death and injury. It's as if dying 70,000 times has had no negative effect on him whatsoever." "Which is impossible," muttered Admiral, the fleet's chief intelligence officer. "Unless," Doctor said quietly, "he's not actually from our reality." The room went dead silent. "Explain," Admiral ordered. Doctor took a deep breath. "I've been analyzing the technical specifications embedded in these death records. The weapons described, the medical procedures used, the technological details, they don't match anything in our dimensional space. Some of the technology is decades ahead of ours. Some of it is based on completely different scientific principles." She called up another display showing comparative analysis charts. "But the most telling evidence is this hidden deep in the data files. I found reference codes for something called Dimensional Translation Protocol 7. There are also repeated mentions of Training Dimension 4 Alpha and Death Mastery Certification Level 9. "What does that mean?" asked Admiral. "I think," Doctor said carefully, "it means that comes from a parallel dimension where human beings have developed some kind of resurrection technology. And they've been using it to create soldiers who have literally died thousands of times to master every possible form of warfare." Admiral leaned back in his chair. In 30 years of military service, he had never heard anything quite this disturbing. "Are you saying that Lieutenant is some kind of weapon?" "I'm saying he's not the human recruit we thought we were getting. Based on this data, is a training graduate from what appears to be the most advanced military program in existence. He's been sent here to study our conflicts, our technology, and our tactical capabilities." "For what purpose?" "I don't know. But admirals, this man has mastered every form of combat death imaginable. He knows our weapons better than our own engineers. He predicts enemy tactics with impossible accuracy. And he shows absolutely no emotional attachment to our cause or our people." Admiral stared at the data displays showing thousands of death records. "How long has he been among us?" 8 months, sir. And in that time, he's had access to our military databases, our tactical plans, our technology specifications, and our strategic thinking." Admiral stood up slowly. "Doctor, I need you to prepare a complete briefing for the Imperial Council. We're dealing with something far beyond a simple security breach." "Sir, what do we do about Lieutenant?" Admiral considered this. Had saved Imperial lives, won impossible battles, and shown nothing but dedication to his duties. But if Doctor was right, he was also something that didn't belong in their reality. "For now, we do nothing. We observe, we learn, and we prepare. But Doctor," Admiral A's voice became very serious, "if is what you think he is, then we need to ask ourselves a very important question." "What question, sir?" "If his dimension has the technology to create soldiers like him, and if they're sending those soldiers to study other realities, what exactly are they preparing for?" Doctor felt a chill run down her spine. She had been so focused on understanding what was that she hadn't considered why someone like him would be sent to their dimension in the first place. "Sir, should I confront him with what I've found?" Admiral shook his head. "Not yet. If he really is from another dimension, then he's operating under orders we don't understand, with goals we can't predict, and with capabilities we can't match. Until we know more, we treat him exactly as we have been as a valuable Imperial officer. But sir, if he's dangerous? Doctor has had 8 months to cause whatever damage he wanted to cause. He's had access to our most sensitive military information and our highest-ranking officers. If he wanted to hurt us, he could have done it already. Admiral paused. The question is whether he's here to study us, or to protect us from something even worse. As the meeting ended, and the admirals filed out to brief the Imperial Council, Doctor remained behind, staring at the displays showing impossible death records. 70,000 deaths, and counting. What kind of war required soldiers who had mastered death itself? And more terrifying, what kind of enemy were they being prepared to fight? The Imperial Council meeting lasted 14 hours. When it finally ended, Admiral had authorization to do something that had never been attempted before: confront a being from another dimension who had been masquerading as one of their own soldiers. Was in his quarters, reviewing tactical reports for the next day's mission, when Admiral arrived with a full security escort. Looked up from his computer and nodded politely, as if he had been expecting this visit. Admiral, to what do I owe the honor? Cut the act, Admiral said as he settled into a chair across from the human. We know what you are. Didn't seem surprised. He saved his work, closed his computer, and leaned back in his own chair. For the first time since anyone had known him, he smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Took you long enough, said. I was starting to wonder if your security was really as good as everyone claimed. Doctor found your death archive. I know. I've been monitoring her investigation since she started. Impressive work, actually. Your has a very thorough mind. Admiral felt a chill. You knew she was investigating you. I know everything that happens on this ship, Admiral. Your computer security is about 50 years behind what I'm used to. Stood up and walked to his small window, looking out at the stars. The question is, what are you planning to do about it? That depends on what you're planning to do about it. Was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of being a normal human soldier. Admiral, how much do you really want to know? Everything. Everything might be more than your people can handle. Try us. Turned back to face Admiral, and the change was startling. The modest, dedicated soldier was gone. In his place stood someone who looked tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. My name is, that part is true. I am from Earth, just not your Earth. In my dimension, humanity discovered something about 30 years ago that changed everything. What did you discover? That consciousness can survive death if you know how to catch it properly, and that if you can bring someone back from death with their memories intact, they can learn things that the living never could. Admiral felt his hands growing cold. You discovered resurrection technology. We discovered something better than resurrection. We discovered death mastery. Began packing around the small room. Do you want to know what it's like to be shot, Admiral? Not just wounded, actually killed by enemy fire. I can tell you exactly how it feels, how long it takes, what your body does in those final moments. Why would anyone want to know that? Because once you've died in every possible way, death stops being a limitation. It becomes another tool. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing weapon specifications. I've been burned alive by plasma. I've suffocated in vacuum. I've been torn apart by explosions. I've been poisoned by every toxic substance known to 63 different species. 70,000 times. 70,000 and counting. Every death recorded, analyzed, and learned from. Do you know what that makes me, Admiral? Admiral was afraid to ask, but he had to know. What does it make you? It makes me the perfect weapon. I don't hesitate in combat because I'm not afraid of the consequences. I understand enemy tactics because I've experienced every possible way they can kill me. I know alien technology because I've died from it enough times to understand how it works. And you came here to study our wars. Shook his head. No, Admiral, I came here to evaluate them. Evaluate them for what? To determine whether your conflicts are sophisticated enough to provide meaningful training experiences for my people. The words hit Admiral like a physical blow. Training experiences. My dimension has perfected warfare, Admiral. We've created soldiers who cannot be permanently killed and who have mastered every form of combat death. But perfection requires constant practice, and we've run out of challenging scenarios in our own reality. Walked to his desk and activated his computer. The screen showed a star map that looked familiar but wrong, similar to Imperial space, but with different boundaries, different conflicts, different civilizations. We've been exploring parallel dimensions, looking for wars that can teach us new things. Most realities are disappointingly primitive, but your dimension showed promise: multiple species, advanced technology, complex tactical situations. So you came here as a scout. I came here as a field evaluator. My job was to experience your conflicts firsthand and determine whether they would provide adequate training value for our Death Scholars. Admiral A's voice was barely a whisper. What was your assessment? Was quiet for a long moment, and something that might have been disappointment crossed his face. Your wars are too clean, Admiral, too civilized, too concerned with minimizing casualties and preserving civilian populations. And that's a problem. For training purposes, yes. My people need scenarios that push the boundaries of survivability. Conflicts where death is not just possible but inevitable, where soldiers must overcome impossible odds through pure tactical brilliance. Your empire fights wars like a business: calculated risks, acceptable losses, strategic objectives. Turned away from the star map. We fight wars like art. Every battle is an opportunity to discover new forms of excellence. Every death is a learning experience that makes us stronger. What happens now? Admiral asked. Now that you've made your evaluation. Now I report back to my superiors that this dimension's conflicts are unsuitable for our training needs. Too predictable, too limited in scope, too restrained in execution. And then we look elsewhere. Paused. Unless, of course, your wars become more interesting. Admiral felt ice forming in his stomach. What do you mean by that? I mean that while your current conflicts are disappointing, your rebel movement shows promise. They're more desperate, more willing to take extreme risks, more creative in their tactics. A few years of proper pressure, and they might develop into something worthy of our attention. You're talking about making our wars worse. I'm talking about making them better, more challenging, more educational. His expression was completely serious. Admiral, you have no idea what your people are capable of when pushed to their absolute limits. I do. I've seen it 70,000 times. Admiral stood up slowly. Are you threatening the Empire? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply explaining the situation. Returned to his chair and reopened his computer. My evaluation period is almost complete. In 3 days, I'll be returning to my own dimension to file my report. And if we try to stop you? For the first time, looked directly at Admiral with an expression of genuine amusement. Admiral, I've been killed by every weapon your people possess, some of them multiple times. What exactly do you think you could do to stop me? Admiral realized that was right. How do you imprison someone who has mastered death itself? How do you threaten someone who considers dying to be a learning experience? There is one thing you should know, continued, his fingers moving over his computer keys. My people aren't the only ones exploring parallel dimensions. We've encountered other realities where different species have developed similar technologies. Some of them are considerably less civilized than we are. Meaning that sooner or later, Your dimension will be discovered by beings who view your people not as potential training partners, but as practice targets. His voice became very serious. When that happens, you'll wish your wars had been more educational. Admiral felt the weight of implications settling on his shoulders. Are you saying we're in danger? I'm saying that in a multiverse filled with beings who have transcended death, civilizations that fight clean wars don't tend to survive very long. Finished whatever he was typing and looked up. I've just transmitted my field report to my superiors. The evaluation is complete. Your dimension has been classified as inadequate training value. Recommend alternative search parameters. What does that mean for us? It means you get to keep fighting your civilized little wars in peace. For now. Stood up and moved toward his equipment locker. I'll be departing tomorrow evening. I suggest you use the time to consider whether you want to keep fighting wars like businessmen, or whether you want to learn how to fight them like artists. As Admiral left's quarters, his mind was reeling with questions and possibilities. They had discovered something impossible living among them, a being from another reality who had mastered death itself. And now that being was leaving, taking with him knowledge that could either destroy them or save them. The final report Admiral filed with the Imperial Council was classified at the highest possible level. Only 3 copies existed, and each one was secured with safeguards that would destroy the document if it was accessed without proper authorization. But the last paragraph of that report would haunt Admiral for the rest of his life. Departed Imperial space at 23:47 hours without incident. His final words were a warning that other dimensional travelers would eventually discover our reality, and that when they did, our current military capabilities would be inadequate for survival. He offered to provide tactical recommendations for improving our combat effectiveness, but only if we were willing to embrace the educational value of death. I respectfully recommend that the Imperial Council carefully consider whether our civilization is prepared to discover what we might become if we accepted such an offer. The death count in its final data transmission showed 70,847 recorded fatalities. The counter was still active,